And just, hi everybody, I'll just let you know that this is being recorded. Apologies for the late warning. Can everybody see my screen? Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going to give a quick introduction to our project, the Embodied Inequalities of the Anthropocene project, and to this special issue of MAT, which will be launching today with the majority of the authors here. So, sorry, just one moment while my screen comes back again. Okay, so this is the cover of the MAT special issue. We've got all of the team of the Embodied Inequalities here today. So that's myself, Jenny Gamlin, Laura Montesi is here, Sarah Gibbon, Paula Sesia, John Segata, and Ceres Victoria, who has not quite arrived yet, but will be here in a moment. And we also have Maria Paula Prates, Ivana Teixeira, and Gabriela Martinez, who are the research fellows who weren't all directly involved in this, but they're part of the project. So I just want to give a couple of really quick overview of the project. So this special issue has been run by the Embodied Inequalities of the Anthropocene project. So we're a sort of research learning project based in UCL in collaboration with the Universidad Federal Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil and CIESAS in Mexico, funded by the Wellcome Trust. I think my screen isn't moving on. Okay. I apologize. I think my screen's gone.
Jenny, just to say that we can see presenter view on your on our, but it doesn't matter. We can see all the slides. I'm just letting you know.
Ah, right. Sorry, I'm going to change it then. I've lost it now. So I don't know which way to do this then. Apologies, everybody.
Jenny, I wouldn't worry. I mean, we can see the slides perfectly fine.
Well, I'm just going to put this on here. It's easier just to have it on the screen. Okay. Okay, sorry about that, everybody. So yeah, I just wanted to briefly talk about the project. So we're basically a collaboration or a collective of people working to sort of build capacity in medical anthropology, thinking about how we address as medical anthropologists the fallout of human-led climate change or Western industrial social orders. So we're thinking about sort of human and more than human bodies and how these are affected by and responding to Anthropocene contexts, what the role is of medical anthropology in explaining the consequences for health and the well-being of ongoing environmental degradation and the loss of biodiversity and climate change, with an emphasis on understanding the unequal distribution, patterning and responses to health in the Anthropocene. So we're working in 4 research areas, so indigenous epistemologies and coloniality of the Anthropocene, gender, reproductive rights and environmental justice, multi-species ethnography and the more than human, and trying to build critical public understanding of the Anthropocene science and working against universal premises. So the final product of our collaboration will be an interactive teaching tool, which is work in progress. And hopefully once that's done, we'll be able to do another Zoom event and invite lots of people along to see it. But actually it's not live at the moment, but a lot of this seminar, as well as other seminars we've been doing, a podcast series and films made by Indigenous filmmakers, as well as think pieces and interactive map, will all form part of the interactive teaching tool. Okay, so just really briefly now, straight over to the launch of MAT. We've divided this presentation into 4 different themes, which are the 4 themes which are which the special issue is focusing on. We've got plantations, toxic ecologies, indigenous ontologies and coloniality of the Anthropocene, and COVID-19. And I'm going to go straight over now to John to give an introduction to the special issue.
So thank you, Jane. I will share my screen. Yeah, I have a
Hopefully
presentation.
you'll be better than me, Jan.
Yeah. Yes, it's okay. So hello, everyone. I want to thank my colleagues, my project colleagues, and the amazing authors who contribute to the math special issue. So I'm João Segata, I'm a Brazilian anthropologist from the Department of Anthropology at the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul. So I'm excited to give you a quick overview of the introductory article in the special issue titled Embodied Inequalities of the Anthropocene. So while editing this special issue of math, our objective was to bring together a collection of fresh, interdisciplinary and innovative perspectives in the field of medical anthropology regarding how the Anthropocene uniquely affects the health of humans, animals, and environments amidst precarious geographies. Through ethnographic investigations, these works critically examine the global discourse surrounding the Anthropocene, firmly anchoring their analysis in the unique landscapes of the global South, with a particular focus in Latin America and Caribbean. So this special issue thus delves into the critical concepts embedded in Latin American context, rooted in a history of inequality, ethnocide, racism, and coloniality, and drawing on insights and experiences derived from engaged anthropological research. This special issue fosters meaningful dialogues in critical areas such as indigenous experiences, coloniality, gender and reproduction, environmental justice, and human-animal relations. Furthermore, it addresses pressing topics, including the COVID-19 pandemic and the broader public understanding of the Anthropocene. So in this introduction, we have organized the articles and the topics in 5 key topics. So I will briefly introduce each of them, starting with the Beyond the Garden. So inspired by a recent controversial statement from Joseph Borrell, the European Union's outspoken head of foreign affairs and security policy, we aim to illustrate how colonialism, both past and present, is at the root of the Anthropocene, shaped by thoughts and practices of contempt and domination over the planet and its diverse populations. For us, it's important to emphasize that if previously it was the process of colonization and expropriations that devastated local populations and natural landscapes, today it is genetic manipulation technologies and free access to precarious labor that convert the low-income and emergent countries into large, profitable plantations of transgenic crops and livestock. Unique geographies give rise to landscapes of slow violence, which include bodies segregated with precarious ecologies. And they highlight the workings of racial capitalism, which disproportionately expose migrants, Black and indigenous people to porous contact with potentially contaminating substances and situations. This is the material manifestation. The articles show this. This is the material manifestation of a structural violence that silently intersects and embodies the Anthropocene and its racial, class, and species hierarchies. And the second topic, chronic wars, we illustrate how the accelerated transformations in local ecologies and global ecosystems promote the proliferation of new pathogens and the emergence of infections, diseases, as well as prolonged droughts, storms, cyclones, and a variety of climate phenomena that are rapidly turning to man in control in a hapless, innocent victim of enraged nature. The response from those in power also are also well documented in the articles. The articles shows that instead of policies of care, the approach is one of the combat, a kind of war against mother nature's viruses, migrants, and everything else. These are chronic wars that blur the collective care for health, citizenship, and the environment with security issues, and who technocratic solutions ways involve separations, defense, combated instead care. Yeah. The third topic, titled "The End of the World Comes Here for Some of Us," we address the questions of how toxic exposure are lived, materialized, and experienced is a central theme at the intersection of health inequality in the Anthropocene. Exposure to waste, toxicity, and pollution is often greater for those who live in liminal frontier geographic zones or abject marginal spaces and landscapes constituted and compounded by capitalism and the contemporary legacies of colonialism, racialization, and exploitation. The fourth topic, the neoliberalization of nature. We revisit the critique of the emerging infrastructure of global food systems, with a particular focus on agribusiness, showcasing how it rekindles the plantation politics and how this politics serves as the central operation of a planetary destruction rooted in the collective exploitation of territories, animals, and vulnerable populations within the unequal landscapes of the global south. And the last topic, on health entanglements and multi-species health, we discuss how the pandemic took shape and intensity in the harmful combination of political and corporate agents dismantling social policies, especially in countries such as Brazil. Historical power relations and inequalities act with the virus in establishing differential environments of risk and vulnerability, especially in the case of the indigenous population discussed in this issue. In the sense, despite the global reach of the pandemic, health, disease, and care relationships need to be understood locally, particularly when they involve, in this case, how I told you, indigenous populations. We understand that the intersection between Anthropocene and health increasingly requires the adoption of a syndemic and a multi-species analysis of the structural violence that connects social, environmental, and health crises. Finally, we try to show in this special issue that we need to build a denser agenda of research and anthropological debates on health, disease, and care processes in the Anthropocene with a view to constituting subsides to promote public policies that maintain, expand, and complexify actions for sustainable development and the quality of life, both human, animals, and environment. In addition, anti-colonial criticism need to be present in the debate of the Anthropocene on health disease processes, moderating the historical and structural violence that directly intersects capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, and the male fetish of domination. So, an agenda of embodied inequalities of the Anthropocene cannot be reduced to a correlation exercise between Anthropocene and emerging diseases in contexts of inequality. For us in this issue, the Anthropocene is the disease, and it's embodied color, gender, class, and geography. So, thank you.
Thank you, Jan. I'll just quickly say that if people want subtitles, you can press the CC button at the base of your screen, and you should be able to get it in different languages. Paula, over to you.
Thank you, Jenny. I'm Paula Cesia from CIESAS, Mexico, and I'm also one of the co-editors of this special issue on medical anthropology and the Anthropocene. And I will present two articles in our special issue. The two articles have to do with the COVID-19 pandemics, indigenous health, and the Anthropocene. They are, the first one is called Toward the Broader View of Health in the Anthropocene by Raquel Diaz-Coppel, Daniel Scoppel, and Jean London. Jean would be presenting her own the article. And the other one is called Situating Latin American Critical Epidemiology in the Anthropocene by Laura Montesi, Maria Paula Prates, Sarah Gibbon, and Lina Berio. And Laura, Maria Paula, and Sarah are here today, and Laura and Maria Paula will be presenting. I just want to say a few things about these two articles in our issue. I think there are many similarities between the two articles. They both analyze the discussion between the COVID-19 pandemics, indigenous health, biopolitics by the state, corporate power, indigenous responses to what's going on in terms of interventions by the state because of the pandemics, and the Anthropocene. Both analyze them in relation to two specific countries, Brazil and Mexico. Both countries have to do with developmental frontiers led by the state or by corporate powers that have negatively affected indigenous people in their health well previous to the COVID pandemic. But the COVID pandemic has obviously had a dramatic increase in terms of burden of disease for indigenous people in both countries. Both also show the importance of indigenous agency vis-a-vis the pandemics and the state strategies, especially in terms of vaccination. And both stress a critique of the Anthropocene as a concept and try to put forward other concepts that each article thinks could be better situate the discussion. Finally, they both stress the enduring and binding relationship between the territory and health when we're looking at indigenous people, or between the territorial dispossession and the health crisis, when these two spheres of intervention or biopolitics by the state are very much dissociated, but they are not in indigenous cosmographies or ontologies when they are deeply intertwined and interconnected. So one of the articles argues for a major clash in between indigenous cosmographies and Western or colonial cosmography on the one hand, and the other article looks and argues for analyzing critically the different meaning of sociality that we have in these different ontologies. So I'm just going to leave it there, and I'm going to give the word to Jean to present her own article at this point. And I'm going to keep the time. Jean, please.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm actually not the first author of this article, but was elected because English is my native language. My two colleagues, Raquel Diaz-Scopel and Danielle Scopel, did the field work for this article, and I collaborated with the analysis and the writing of the article. And I wish to thank my two colleagues for inviting me into this really important research. The research that we have conducted is in the region of Mato Grosso do Sul, which is one of Brazil's region that represents structural violence in a major way, as well as a major violence against its indigenous peoples. I'm sure most people have heard about the violence that is perpetuated in Brazil, both to the environment and to the indigenous peoples. And Mato Grosso do Sul is the center of this violence. They have the largest indigenous population in the country, as well as statistics that prove that the indigenous population suffer the greatest violence. And this is done primarily, the primary history of this begins in the 1950s when agribusiness moves into the Mato Grosso Sul state, and the indigenous populations are confined to small indigenous reserves. The health situation of these indigenous peoples, malnutrition, hypertension, obesity, diabetes, respiratory problems, all demonstrates the structural violence that is perpetuated against these indigenous people. And what we're trying to do in this article is contrast what would be a colonial cosmography, which is a relation with the territory, which is one that involves use of the territory. It involves the logic of elimination, that you will eliminate the other populations that have had a history on this territory, and it is a capitalist relationship with the territory. We contrast this with indigenous cosmography, which talks about a collective relation, a sentimental as well as a knowledge relationship with the territory among the indigenous groups, and which does not follow the logic of elimination, but in fact is one of relation with the different energies that exist in that territory for subsistence and survival of the group as a collectivity. We demonstrate, talk about in the article, how COVID had a syndemic impact upon the indigenous populations. But I think probably more important here, and for the limited time I have to speak, is that we emphasize the indigenous activism in the absence of a state. What happens when the COVID pandemic impacts upon the Brazilian indigenous populations is that Bolsonaro, our president at that time, who was encouraging violence against indigenous people, encouraging the cutting down of the Amazon, he also at that point dismantled public institutions. And of course, one of the institutions is an extremely important institution for indigenous health, is indigenous subsistence of health, in which he militarizes. He appointed military officials in the key positions of the health system, and basically worked against indigenous participation. Briefly, the indigenous health subsystem is based upon a principle of participation and social control of the indigenous populations. And during the period of the COVID, this was eliminated by Bolsonaro, at least they attempt to eliminate it. What happens on a national level, we have APIB, the Articulação de Povos Indígenas Brasileiros, that rises to national visibility through its indigenous lawyers, through working against the actions of the Bolsonaro government in favor of the indigenous people. And on the local level, which our article concentrates on, which involves the field work, we look upon the way in which the indigenous leaders, the indigenous community health workers, the indigenous health counselors organized in their communities to construct sanitary barriers, to provide with medical supplies, masks, gloves, and water, other things that were needed for the communities, as well as to work very closely, very actively against the false communications circulating. Brazil was like other countries, a tremendous amount of false communication about the disease, about the vaccinations. There was a militarization of the attempts to vaccinate the Indians. And what we have is the local indigenous leaders and health workers fighting to protect their communities and to educate their communities. I think one of the major contributions, and this probably is from my position, besides its contribution to understanding a little bit more about the difference between indigenous cosmography that is very different than the Anthropocene cosmography, or what we call the colonial cosmography in this article. But I think one of the most important things is to highlight indigenous activism, and also to highlight the indigenous perspective of health, which our title refers to, toward a broader perspective of health, a broader definition of health, one that involves the body, one that involves the territory. And when I speak of the body, we're speaking of the collective body. So that when we think about the difference between this colonial cosmography that assumes that territory is to be owned, individualized, and industrialized, we have the indigenous cosmography, which believes that the cosmography must be, the territory must be sustained from a collective and spiritual position. As the article finishes, it talks about colonial cosmography as a collective, vital, enduring project for the indigenous people in Brazil.
Thank you very much, Jean, and thank you for keeping the time. I'm going to switch now to the second article of the COVID-19 and Indigenous people section of our math issue. I just want to take the time to remind people who are in the platform that the math issue is available for free. It's open access, so please access it and read it, because it's actually very interesting. So I'm going to switch now to Laura and Maria Paula. I think they have a presentation.
Yes, thank you. It's all working for you? Yeah, you can see. Okay. Thank you. It's an honor to present this paper after Professor Jen Langdon, a reference on indigenous health in Brazil. This paper, Laura, Lina, Sarah, and I, we reflected on the intersection proposed, like the analysis proposed by a Latin American epidemiology that encompass regional, encompass political economy, political ecology, and historical entanglements with colonialism. So that's we argue that this framework might be helpful to compose with the indigenous understandings of health, instead of that only focus on like very general terms of the European epidemiology approach. We also this paper, let me see here. we ask the questions we have addressed throughout this paper is: how has the COVID pandemic been experienced, acted, and reflected upon indigenous peoples in different Latin American contexts? Here we are talking about Brazil and Mexico. So about the Brazil, the ethnographic data collected in Brazil, it comes from a Paris research project, indigenous response to COVID-19. It was an ambitious project during the pandemic with indigenous researcher working together with non-indigenous researcher. The data we collected give us the opportunity. It's very well known, but we took consequence about the understanding, the idea, this very compartmentalized organization that's apart health from territory, from land recognition in Brazil. So indigenous interlocutors, our friends that for a long time have said why we are getting the vaccine instead of having our lands recognized. That helps for us. So it operates in different ways for different collectives, of course, each one with different modes of relating with the whites, but this was a central question. The conception of health in place didn't match with their own conception of health that would mainly include the way they relate with their territories. So these are our questions that we addressed. I don't think I should read, but I hope you can read. Here. Am I hurrying up too much, Sarah and Laura? So I have some part of this slide I have addressed in the previous one. And we have Mexico. We compare data from Mexico and Brazil. One of the things that we addressed as well in this paper is what is the social when we are thinking about social determinants. What the social is in place from public health policies, and how these do not match with indigenous understandings of what social that excludes other than humans or more than human beings. Yeah, thank you. Laura?
Yeah, can you change slide? Okay. So as Maria Paula was saying, our central argument in the paper is that Latin America critical epidemiology provides an underutilized framework for examining the embodied inequalities of the Anthropocene. And we recognize that there are diverse and rich histories and genealogies of Latin America critical epidemiology. It's not homogeneous across the region. But nevertheless, a commonality across these approaches is the fact that they think collectively about health and disease as historically situated biosocial processes. There is an effort to move beyond the focus on the individual as a unit of analysis, and also to be critical of the risk factor approach, especially when it is based on a narrow behavioralist framework. And instead, critical epidemiology addresses questions of political economy, political ecology, colonialism and ongoing coloniality, while also attending to non-Western disease experiences and understandings. For example, the importance of interculturality and the importance of incorporating indigenous worldviews and modos de vida, ways of life, of living, such as buen vivir. Maria Paula, I think that we need to show the content of the slide. Okay, yeah, fantastic. And So in the paper, we suggest that Latin America critical epidemiology helps us to deconstruct official epidemiology, especially as we saw that it had a central role during the pandemic. So we use this case of COVID-19 vaccination both in Brazil and Mexico to think aloud, to think out aloud. We recognize that at the time of the pandemic, there were two very different political regimes in Brazil and Mexico. And of course, this had different effects on how the pandemic was approached. But at the same time, we found a commonality, for example, the fact that both in Mexico and Brazil considered indigenous peoples as a priority for vaccination. And at the same time, the mega projects and heralded by the state and corporate powers didn't stop during the pandemic. And so we try to make sense of the question of some indigenous peoples, both in Mexico and Brazil, regarding what was the sense of being a priority for vaccination, while violence over their lands and territories was actually going on. So we analyze embodied memory of suffering, the collective memories of governmental deceptions, among other things. We end up basically reflecting on how critical epidemiology can be a good framework to think about coloniality in health and disease. Also, Latin American critical epidemiology has reflected at length on the social causation of ill health and the processual nature of this. But perhaps we still have the challenge of really reconfiguring what we mean by social causation, because even in Latin America critical epidemiology, we think that it is focused on a sociality which is still very human-centered. And instead, if we look at how indigenous collectives make sense of health and disease, we understand that socialities include other beings. So this is a fundamental challenge that we have to uptake in order to think about Anthropocene health. We see that there is this as linked to a broader challenge about how to balance social justice and social difference, and wider questions about the role of the state, for example, in addressing Anthropocene health and indigenous communities, particularly when COVID-19 has made the issue of governance and legitimacy more visible. So our paper doesn't provide all the answers to these questions, but of course, we hope to have opened the door in our presentation to underline the relevance of these questions within the Anthropocene. Many thanks.
Thank you, Maria Paula. Thank you, Laura. We're going to switch a little bit our order of presentations. So now I'm going to give the word to Jenny for the plantation section of our issue, so that Alex Nadding can still be here with us before he has to go. Jenny.
Thanks, Paula. I hope that's okay with you, Alex and Victoria. So really, I'm just going to give a very brief introduction to the next section because we're already running behind time. So we focused on, I realized that John's presentation didn't use the same titles as us, but we're talking about here the neoliberalization of nature when we're thinking about the plantation. So when Anna Singh talks about the patchy Anthropocene, she intends to draw attention to a better understanding of the context where human action and impact on the planet is more intensive. One of these spots is the plantation that Alex Nudding in his paper talks about as a hotspot, a dynamic context in action. It's the capacity of large expanses of monoculture to generate illness, incubate new diseases, contaminate and degrade that has given rise to the concept of the plantationocene, placing the role of extractive monocultures at the center of human impacts on our planet. So in this section of the special issue, we explore through two papers the historical and contemporary role of a plantation in exacerbating inequalities. So I'll now go straight to Alex to talk about his paper, The Plantation as Hotspot, Capital, Science, Labour and the Earthly Limits of Global Health.
Thank you, Jenny, and thanks to everybody who organized this special issue. It was a real honor to be a part of such a wonderful international group and to do medical anthropology and environmental anthropology focused on Latin American stories and experiences feels too rare, and so I'm really glad that we were able to do that. So I just want to give an overview of some of the basic arguments in this paper, which turned out to be a kind of rehearsal for a longer book project that's in the works that I'm working on. So this idea of the plantation as hotspot emerges out of research that I've been doing since about 2015 on the emergence of a new form of chronic kidney disease in many parts of the world, but strongly associated with Central America and also strongly associated with the sugarcane industry in the region. Kidneys have become, in some sense, a kind of bellwether organ for the Anthropocene. Strange things happening and strange pathologies happening have been associated with intensified heat, as well as the use of agrochemicals, the deterioration of water resources, nutrition, and other things. So what this paper tries to do is to think about Anthropocene health through the lens of labor and a laboring body, but also to explore the utility of this concept of a hotspot, which many of us as scholars of global health will know very well, for analyzing that relationship between labor and health in the Anthropocene. So this is where I'm working. Western Nicaragua is sort of the sugarcane zone of the country, where there are 4 sugarcane plantations, and I worked primarily on one just to the south and west of Managua called Montelimar. Just this sort of a grainy slide that hopefully gives you an idea about how this notion of a hotspot has sort of gained currency in discussions of kidney disease, and particularly this novel form of chronic kidney disease, which is sometimes known as chronic kidney disease of unknown causes, or CKDU, or chronic kidney disease of non-traditional causes, CKD-NT. Probably the densest bodies of research on this disease come from South India and Sri Lanka, and from Mexico and Central America. So in the paper, I explore this notion of a hotspot in 3 ways, and ask sort of how plantations specifically become hotspots. And so sort of overlaying all of this is, of course, the idea that global warming does produce uniquely intense environmental extremes, temperature extremes. And so I'll get to that again in a second. So the 3 kinds of hotspots are hotspots of investment, hotspots of experimental scrutiny, and then grassroots processes of hotspotting, which is a term I borrowed from the feminist geographer Shiloh Krubar. So first, hotspots of investment. This picture on the left sort of shows one version of the view of the intensification of sugar cultivation in Nicaragua, which involves heavy use of chemical ripeners, specifically glyphosate. And the picture on the right is sort of an artist rendering of this idea of the global land grab. So the context for the expansion of sugarcane production around the world is the intensified investment by the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation, and a whole bunch of private corporations in sugarcane, not just as food, but but as potential fuel. Fuel both as ethanol and as bagasse or sugarcane biomass. So in Nicaragua, the expansion of sugarcane over the last 20 years, which has been massive, has really been related to the attempt to generate energy from biofuels. And so this has transformed the landscape that was already pretty well transformed by plantation agriculture over the last half century or so. So the hotspot, the plantations, in other words, become, even though they're old, newly reformed as hotspots for capital investment, places where money can be made in new ways. And of course, that has negative feedback effects because as this is happening, trees fall, water resources are sucked, and the average temperatures in areas, especially areas where the land grab is intensifying, is going up. So this means that workers bear the brunt of that warming planet. And so this process of warming has really supplanted other questions about health, and at least in Nicaraguan plantations, specifically questions around toxicity. And it's become the focal point for the second kind of hotspotting that I talk about, which is the rendering of the plantation into a hotspot for occupational and environmental research. So to cut a long story short, researchers are trying, as these pictures show, to see if providing workers with water, rest, and shade during the workday can protect them from kidney injury. This is a process that's sponsored by several organizations, including a group called Bon Sucro, which is a sort of roundtable industry-led responsible production group. So these experiments basically use shade tents and water provision, electrolyte enhanced water, to try to protect workers' kidneys. I sort of argue that they actually end up normalizing intensified plantation labor, which is inherently violent, and create these kind of sort of spaces apart and redraw the sharp lines between plantation life and other forms of life. In other words, they do a great job protecting the plantation from its own worst effects. It's not clear that they actually make a meaningful change in the lives of workers. And so this is all part of a broader effort to adapt sugarcane production to climate change. Finally, I talk a little bit about hotspotting in the paper, which is the ways in which people, especially women in the sugarcane context, use a variety of methods, specifically social media, to call attention to things that aren't being explored in these scientific investigations. And the main thing is the continued use of agrochemicals dropped from helicopters to ripen sugarcane, which of course drift onto people's crops and onto their homes and do damage that is not clearly defined. So they make videos like this and circulate them to call attention to the dangers of those things which aren't being addressed in global health research. And of course, this comes from a long history of exposure to agrochemicals in Nicaragua, which goes back to the middle of the 20th century, US-led development efforts there. And it affects water resources, and it also affects homes and villages because they are so close to the cane. So a lot of the work that I and my collaborators tracked was this effort to continue to keep the problem open and refuse the notion that these experiments on water, rest, and shade are going to close and resolve the problem. So I think I'll stop there. I think that's probably my time. But again, I just want to say what a real privilege it is to be in this group and to share this work. And I want to echo that the special issue is fantastic. And I hope that everyone goes and downloads it. And I should also thank the editors and reviewers from MAP who really helped me make this paper much better than it was originally, along with the editors of the special issue. So I'm always grateful for that work. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you. That was brilliant. It just so resonates with me because I did my own PhD research with tobacco plantations, and the participants took pictures of planes going over spraying. Okay, thank you very much. So we're handing over now to Victoria Ebbia, who's going to talk about structural vulnerability and toxicity experiences in the Uruguayan soybeanization process.
Hello, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for the invitation and the opportunity of sharing my work. I'm an Uruguayan anthropologist, and I work from the Universidad de la República in Uruguay. And I'm really grateful for the comments and the insights on this article. It was like a very big challenge to be able to finally make it to see the light. And I'm very grateful for all the insights and the opportunity of reaching to broader audiences, which is always a big challenge when we are producing anthropology from the South, and especially from a small country such as Uruguay. So in my work, in this article, I try to analyze these both notions, how structural vulnerability intersects in the toxicity experience, particularly in GMO soybean agribusiness contexts in Uruguay. So my main argument regarding the discussion about Anthropocene and how Anthropocene is producing global health inequalities is that Latin American transgenic soybeans agribusiness should be considered as what Anna Singh called simplified plantation landscapes. And also Nadine's previous work is really useful to get to frame better this kind of context. In Uruguay, in the last 25 years, GMO soybean has had a great expansion in the rural agricultural area. And this great expansion has been correlated with also a great increment in pesticides importation and use, especially glyphosate, but also other toxic substances. So how this process is impacting in collective health, and how is it framing different health inequalities. To address that kind of questions, I based my research in the Latin American critical cultural approach, and I focused my work on how wage agricultural workers and women and children in rural areas were experimenting this kind of toxicity and this kind of impacts. And to doing that, I made an ethnographic approach at an agricultural region. I worked in I observed the productive and reproductive cycle, and I had also some collective discussions with my collaborators, which show they have helped me to focus my attention not only on how structural vulnerability is produced, but also how health experience is much more broader than the acute intoxication problem that can be seen from the biomedic perspective. So in order to address that, in the article I discussed two kinds of illnesses and that are recognized from these women and workers' perspectives. So I identified two main groups, which kind of illness that are endured and normalized as everyday life matters, and other group of illnesses that are worth of attention. And this second group is interesting to notice that as the same in the previous works that have been presented of the issue, they are intersecting social, ecological, relational dimensions that are more broader than just the biomedical dimension of intoxication. So the final remarks of my article and an invitation to open up the discussion and to continue to put our works in dialogue, are that transgenic soybean agribusiness should be paid attention and should be taken into account when we are considering the embodied inequalities of health in the Anthropocene. Also, how structural vulnerability to pesticide exposure is it is produced by an intersection of class, gender, knowledge, power relations, and also about technology and state regulations about technology. And finally, how the embodied experience of pesticide toxicity is encompassing the deterioration of environments in which daily life develops, interpersonal conflicts, challenging conditions that are normalized and endure as a part of daily life, as well as chronic health problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Because we're running behind time, I think we'll go straight on. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah, who is going to introduce the next theme, which is toxicity.
Thanks very much, Jenny. Yeah, it's great to be able to present on this theme. We've already heard a lot about toxicity and actually the boundaries, I think, between the question, the themes around plantations, toxicity, and the other themes that we're presenting today are very blurred, in fact. So this is a somewhat arbitrary kind of boundary that we've set up for these presentations. But just to present this section, it's been suggested that toxicity is a foundational category for the Anthropocene. It's therefore not surprising, I think, that the question of how toxic exposures from waste and pollution are lived, materialized, and experienced at the intersection of health and inequality is a central theme of our special issue, given the way that these exposures, as we've already seen, are unevenly stratified and can further marginalize vulnerable communities. So these are key questions for thinking through toxicity in our special issue, as the presentations already have shown. At the same time, the contributions that we turn to now in this part of the seminar are orientated to the dynamics of toxic exposure, their unexpected consequences, as well as the violent and uncomfortable conjunctions they reproduce, where embodied biosocial entanglements shape emotions, consumption, suffering, and survival. So the first speaker on this theme is Melania Kalistani. Melania is a medical anthropologist and a senior lecturer at Kingston University, London. And the title of her paper on our special issue is Toxic Legacies and Health Inequalities of the Anthropocene, Perspectives from the Margins. So I'll hand over to Melania.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you all see my screen? Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you for the editors of the special issues and the reviewers for all the comments that have really helped to improve this article. And I really appreciated all your hard work on this. And I've been really enjoying all the presentations up to now. So thank you very much for the opportunity to participate. And in this article, I engage with perspectives from critical medical anthropology to discuss how global economic forces impact on individuals' health and well-being. And in particular, the article deconstructs embodiments and social histories of toxicity to look at how uneven power relations and health inequalities have been generated through late capitalism of the Anthropocene. And I conducted multi-sited ethnographic research in Matamoros on the US-Mexico border and in Naples in southern Italy. And although these places are located in different continents, there are many similarities in terms of high level of exposure to toxicity. And Matamoros can be seen as being placed in the north of the global south, and Naples in the south of the global north. And they are at the margins of borders, whether real ones, like in the case of Matamoros, the border dividing the US and Mexico, or imagined and constructed ones, like in the case of southern Italy, where there is a sort of national Orientalism when it comes to the southern part of the country. And in both of these locations where I conducted research, there were also similarity in terms of food and water consumptions, or avoiding local food and tap water. So I will talk a little bit more about these aspects going through the presentation. But how can we really define margins? So in the article, I use this definition by Lancione, which very much provides like a way to talk about margins. So Lancione writes that being at the margin means to be situated on the other side of the border, while someone else is on the inside. Sorry, I cannot see now this one. Yeah, okay, sorry. While someone else is on the inside, somewhere more towards the center. Borders render the margins at the same time possible and visible, tangible and effective, embodied and felt. To say that the practice of bordering, of delineating what is right and what is wrong, what is in and what is out, produces margins, means essentially to state that through bordering, specific spaces and people are produced as well. So I use this idea of margins and borders to talk about uneven power relations between the North and the South, and linking it with some of the topics that have been basically presented during the introduction. And I also argue that a way to materialize these margins is through waste and its circulation. And the post-war period has been described as the period of great acceleration with exponential consumption and also waste production. And dismantling waste is very expensive. So often it is easier, for example, to dismantle waste through by illegal dumping toxic waste in fields, as it happens, for example, in the region of Naples, and this is basically done by mafia structure, organized crime. And on the other side, in Matamoros, there is industrial pollution, which is due very much to the development of the border industrial program since the 60s. So it's very much then in this context, through my ethnographic work, I try to show that the Anthropocene is not just a geological and biological event, but is very much like a social and political one, and therefore I try to deconstruct how legal and the illegal capitalist forces, for example, through corporations, but also the organized crime, are very much subsumed into the undeserving and disposable bodies of people living at the margins. And I here use very much the concept of subsumption as analyzed by Jaime Braille with critical epidemiology. And so, I mean, I also try to look at these capitalist forces in addressing the concept of the commercial determinants of health, because I think it can really provide like a very important lens to talk about uneven power relations and health inequalities of the Anthropocene. And I provide a definition of commercial determinants of health as strategies and approaches used by the private sector to promote products and choices that are detrimental to health. And of course, I link it with my ethnographic account, looking at how local food and water in Matamoros and in Naples are classified as being concentration of dioxin, as being also unhealthy, unfair, unjust by the people I did research with. And so in this case, multinational corporations come in again after having polluted the environment with huge profits when it comes to consumption, for example, of imported food and bottled water and soda drinks, because people I worked with, they really basically were keen to communicate the fact that they couldn't consume local food or tap water because it was extremely contaminated. And so they were forced to buy imported food and bottled water in Naples or soda drinks in Matamoros because it was much cheaper. So, so I think this is what I've tried to do with the article. I tried to connect the global level with the local one, and the ethnographic research can help really to visualize these invisible forces that are really, affecting the health and well-being of people. And I think, Sarah, I will stop here to give a possibility for a further discussion, but thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Melania. That was wonderful. I'd like to move on then, in the interest of time, to invite the second presenter in this theme section on toxicity to present their summary of their paper. So the second presenter is Delia Hallowell. Delia is a PhD student in the Anthropology department at UCL, and the title of her paper is Just Graphite, Corporate Representations of Particulate Matter in Santa Cruz, Rio de Janeiro. And I'll hand over to Delia, if that's possible.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, perfect.
And can you see my slides?
Not yet, but now we can. Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
I'll just put them on. Okay. So, hi, yeah, my name's Delia, and I wrote the article Just Graphite, Corporate Representations of Particulate Matter in Santa Cruz, Rio de Janeiro. This article is based on research that I conducted in 2014 and 15 as part of my PhD at UCL in the Anthropology department. So it's about the case of the TKCSA, or the ThyssenKrupp Compañía Siderúrgica del Atlántico, which is a steel factory on the outskirts or the periphery of Rio de Janeiro. It's now been sold to Ternium, and it's one of the biggest steel factories in Latin America. It's famous for having caused various critical polluting in which large amounts of particulate matter were emitted into and covering the residential areas surrounding the factory, and residents still complain that the factory continues to pollute the area with a finer metal dust. And they also complain about associated health impacts, so including allergic reactions, nosebleeds, headaches, joint pain, shortness of breath, sore eyes, rashes, and they claim increasing incidences of cancer and general claims that people are becoming more gravely ill and more frequently. So in this article, I have followed and centered the immaterial and less visible dynamics that occurred in this patch of the Anthropocene as a result of and in response to pollution, potential toxicity and environmental conflict. So this article is based on an ethnographic exploration of a single event, a tour which I attended in the steel mill, which was offered as part of their corporate social responsibility program. So here you see an advert, that's the advert for the tour that the company offered, and a quote from the company's representative who was running the tour. So I deconstruct the language used on this tour and the claim that dust was just graphite and that breathing it in was just like children sucking on the ends of their pencils. So I do that to claim that violence can be located in corporate language in and of itself. So I look at the rhetorical effects of figurative speech to identify the violence of corporate communication. So in that phrase, there's a longer quote in the article, but I've identified simile, which is where they say breathing in dust with a pencil, and this simplifies the issue and narrows the scope of debate. analogy, which is, emissions are to residents as pencils are to children. And this analogy carried associations with it which present the dust as harmless and unimportant. And synecdoche, which is the generalized classification of graphite minerals, replaced with the more specific solid graphite used in pencils. And this hides the fact that even if the dust were just graphite, the inhalation of graphite dust can cause health problems. The context and delivery style of the quote also provided a pedagogical tone which infantilized the audience and reinstated a sense of hierarchy between the company and its neighbours. So I argue that it isn't necessary to prove that the TKCSA's public relations language is the cause of any specific harm in order for it to be worthwhile to note the violence that runs through the corporate denial. And this is part of a triple exposure. So A, the pollution, B, corporate denials that the pollution can have health impacts, and C, the corporate social responsibility, which presents the factory as a good neighbour. So I document two types of emotional responses to this triple exposure. Firstly, one that expressed and contained emotion in everyday life. So I described everyday minimal bodily expressions of emotion, which appeared to be attempts to recognise and cope with the idea that things were probably not going to get better. And these were everyday moments of stopping with emotions, feeling them, expressing them in order to be able to move on. And these were positive actions in which quiet despair intensified and out of which one could return to ordinary life. I put a quote up here, which I won't read out, but this is an example in the article. And secondly, I look at the emotional labour of political agency. So this is emotion that accentuated harm caused by providing emotional displays for an audience. And this was part of the Stop TKCSA campaign. So I described more obvious, bound, and in some cases extreme displays of emotion, which made up a significant portion of activist actions in the campaign against the factory. These were dependent on the president's relational and infrastructural support to ensure the conditions for potentially effective protest. So, for example, the president of the TV crew is, or an anthropologist, for example. And finally, make the claim that this emotion built up to contribute to an effectively saturated landscape around the factory, where emotion formed a kind of spatial envelopment that was more than specific to particular individuals and more than the transpersonal intensities of collective emotion. And I want to say thank you very much for including me in the special issue, which is amazing. And thanks very much for inviting me to this event. Thanks for organising it.
Thank you very much, Delia. And thanks to both presenters for those very wonderful summaries, and they really are rich and excellent contributions to the special issue. I think in the interest of time, we're going to move forward. So we pass on to the next section, which I think is going to be introduced by Laura.
I'll just say really quickly that there will be time for discussion at the end. Laura.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, the next and last section is in dialogue with indigenous ontologies, either directly or indirectly. And we have the pleasure to introduce Cole de Lima Hutchinson and Andrea Núñez Casal with the paper Sustaining Disembodied Inequalities in Their Eurocene, Ancient Microbes, Racial Anthropometry and Life Choices. And also our colleague Jenny Gamlin with the paper Wirrarica Practices of Medical Syncretism and Ontological Proposal for Health in the Anthropocene. I think that both papers adopt a longue durée approach in order to understand how the Anthropocene has materialized. And they also, in the case of Jenny, proposes, and she will tell us more, modernity as the ontological Anthropocene. And they analyze in the Peruvian and Brazilian Amazon and in the Atlantic Forest region in Argentina, the relationships, the complex relationships between scientists and state health professionals with indigenous populations, and we understand that there is an important asymmetrical relationship, which doesn't mean that there isn't a capacity of agency on the part of indigenous collectives. And we also have this asymmetrical relationship based on processes of colonialism and coloniality in Jenny's paper, where she elucidates the differences between with radical medical systems, understandings of health and disease, and biomedicine. So we will start with Cole de Lima and Andrea, and then we will listen to Jenny. Cole, the floor is yours, and go ahead, please. Thank you.
Okay, can you? Apologies for any background sound. I'm in the Highlands of Scotland in a cafe which is mostly empty just now, apart from some nice pop music. Thanks. I just first of all like to say thanks everyone for being here, and we really appreciate all the work of the editors, Sarah and Laura, everyone, and also the MIT editors. And we're just going to give a little summary or a little intro into our paper. So first of all, this paper kind of comes from both of our independent ethnographic projects. Andrea's work with following microbiome research expedition into indigenous communities in Peru and Brazil, and my own doctoral research exploring encounters between medical health professionals and Guarani communities in Misiones, Argentina. And although these projects were conducted at different times and places, I think we managed, the specialists, you give us an opportunity to kind of bring these together, and I think in a way that, particularly around this notion of the Anthropocene. And so we found that by just juxtaposing our projects, we hope to jointly demonstrate how the reproduction and intensification of indigenous embodied inequalities in the Americas are produced and perpetuated through disembodied, or more specifically racialized, biomedical practices. In the case of my field work, focusing on anthropometric growth standards, and in Andrea's, the notion of measuring microbial biodiversity. And basically from we both have backgrounds in biology, and we had a shared concern around biomedicine and the kind of inherent racial and colonial legacies that are perpetuated, and often when these, either in science or policy, they're done in pursuing health. No? And so I think this picture is from Misiones. It was taken during a community health visit from a medical doctor to a community in central Misiones, and the ambulance was going to provide access to antibiotics, and conduct what they call medical controls. So this is when the doctor would measure the weight and height of children and compare them to WHO growth standards. And so one thing that we really want to kind of draw out here is what we sought to explore was a kind of a supposed contradiction. Yeah? So in the case of the public health provision of health in Misiones to Mbuya, there's this notion of the way to improve their health was through better public health access. So this was partly adapting the state health system to Mbuya communities. And of course, this was very limited. In many ways, you have you can see the vehicle actually getting stuck here. And this was something that Mario, one of the community health workers, and also Cacique, one of the communities, was very exacerbated about. in the sense that you have the provision of the promise of provision of health, which provided, many Mbuya with momentary alleviations from some of their sufferings, but fundamentally was incapable of really addressing the health that the state health system was promising them. And of course, this was predated on, better access is predated on greater deforestation, loss of biodiversity, and in many ways disempowering or disentangling them or distancing them from their own practice of health. And maybe this obviously speaks to Laura's paper as well, and many of the other papers, in the sense of the kind of ontological conflict here, that focusing on health or biomedical concepts obscure. And in the case of Andrea's work, so I'm just going to go over to Andrea's now. So Andrea's was focusing on these microbiome scientists who were conducting expeditions into the Amazon, Peruvian and Brazilian, to as part of the microbiome science that's kind of been developing within biomedical discipline. No? And part of the thesis there is that indigenous people's microbiomes, especially those that live supposedly, I'll just read it and maybe it makes more sense in that sense. So the study began from the assumption that modern people's ancestors, namely indigenous peoples, remain spatially beyond the reach of modernization. So involuntary isolation might host microbes that could reverse, because they are our living ancestors. This is kind of the discourses you can find in the microbiome science. The damaging effects of modernization on microbiome. So here, in the case of the Mbuya and Misiones, the state attempts to provide health through modernization, so that the better access the doctors have will be through the communities that are closer to the urban settings, and of course that undermines the Mbuya's own tekoa, their own pursuit of their own practice of health. Or historical practices. But in the case of the microbiome science, where the state or these scientific practices valorize indigenous peoples who have not gone under are not subject to modernization, as another source of a way to improve the health of what modernization has done to Western guts. So there's this is the kind of contradiction in a sense. And this is how the racialization, of Mbuya or another indigenous communities are used for remedying either the state in the case of Argentina or the microbiome sciences in the case of these expeditions. And situating our research in the kind of the Anthropocene allows us kind of to take a step back and see the continuity in the medical practice. I'm going to pass over to Andrea because I'm sure I'm going over time. Andrea, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm very honored and thankful, and I'm not going to go over, but just thanks so much for giving us the opportunity and for including us in the special issue. So I'm going to share just some slides. I don't know if you can see them. Is that okay?
We see the previous picture.
Okay. Just one moment. I'm going to try to. Okay. Yeah, I think now. Let me see if I can share. Just 1 second. Yes. Here it is. Sorry about that.
Yes.
Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So I think not in full mode, but it's fine. So this the main point for us was how we bring our both distinct projects together into a conversation and in the framework of the Anthropocene. So this is something that Cole already covered about my project, that is following a team of microbial scientists, at that time a pioneer in the 2012 until 2018, and they were looking at the changes in microbial patterns in human, non-human, and their environments. So what they wanted to do is that take the ancestral or core human microbiome of indigenous people as a possible solution to tackle antimicrobial resistance. And they took, here you have the map, 4 different locations across the Amazon in Peru and Brazil, and taking different microbiological, environmental, and architectural samples, because the project was the microbiomes of homes across cultures. So they wanted to see how patterns, different patterns in lifestyle change in microbial communities. So this was part of my PhD, and what I found is that microbial science reproduce immunology of self and other through the neocolonial practice of expropriation of nature, in this case microbes, and it also reproduces structural difference in societies by biologizing and by naturalizing cultural practices into microbial profiles. So we combine both the biomedical part of microbiome with the public health intervention in Misiones, Argentina, of Cole. And for us, it was very, very useful. One book that was The Body of the Conquistador by Rebecca Earle. And here, food was something common about for Cole and I, because microbiome can be modified with food. And in Cole's project, the main intervention, health intervention, was through nutrition. So food was, of course, a civilizing tool for the conquistador, explains Earle. And this success of their imperial expansion depended on the ability to cultivate these foodstuffs in their colonies. So here we also play with the concept and problematize the concept of the plantationocene. The plantationocene and the biology of its history, the long durée, as before other colleagues were saying, how it reverberates and is temporally sustained, not only in the embodied inequalities of the communities in Misiones, but also in the West. Why in the West? In the case of my project, because people from lower socioeconomic status, they will have less microbial diversity and therefore more disposition to metabolic, autoimmune, and inflammatory diseases. So we theorize that under this situation, these people, they have been dispossessed of the necessary conditions to sustain other forms of life. And these histories have to come embodied as shunted growth, infections, or modern metabolic diseases. And what we found also is that microbiome scientists and state policies that focus on lifestyle choices protect rather than challenge those who have benefited the most from this life, and that they have given rise to the Eurocene or the Plantationocene. And finally, our paper, what we try to conclude with or to reframe is like how to trace and cease reproducing these colonial and racialized geologies of history. It's important to recognize these embodied consequences in the present, as well as how they are implicated in the geologies of the Euro-Plantationocene. And this will mean a politicization of geology as well as biology, that it doesn't flatten these diverse struggles and forms of embodied inequalities. And yeah, and thank you so much. I'm sure this is over time, but thanks a lot.
Thank you, Andrea. Really interesting. Thank you so much. Jenny, it's your turn now.
Okay, hi everybody again. Let's see if I get this right this time. Is that full screen now?
Yes, it is now.
Great. Okay. Okay. So I'm sure everybody's dying to ask questions or needs the toilet or to get water, because we're right near the end. And luckily I don't have to thank anybody in particular, just say to our wonderful colleagues and to everybody, this has been a really, really fantastic process. As much listening to everybody now as the reviewing and the different ways in which we're involved in everybody else's papers in the process. Okay, so I'm going to try not to go too fast, but just to gloss over the content of my paper, which is Radical Practice of Medical Syncretism, an ontological proposal for health in the Anthropocene. So I'm actually not right now going to go through too much of the ontological Anthropocene, which Laura mentioned, but to focus a bit more on the practice of medical syncretism. Sorry, no, I can't. Okay, so the ontological Anthropocene is this idea of centering the human individual and the severing of modern man from other forms of life, spirits and planetary forms. So my discussion of health is first and foremost an ontological explanation of how the self and the exceptionalism of moderns has become separated from other forms of life, the planet and spirituality, creating a sociality of individuals. So I refer to this separation as the ontological Anthropocene, a process that happened during the centuries of colonialism, which modern humans came to see and define themselves hierarchically in relation to other life forms. So what is Wirarika more than human sociality? How the Wirari, which is the plural name for the Wirarika community, they're based in the northwest of Mexico, and how Wirari respond to health, illness, and treatment cannot be separated from the ways of living in and with the world. And through learning about their medical system, I came to understand more broadly their ontology of life. So creating the conditions for growing maize is central to this, and every family must take part in acts of communing with their spiritual and natural environment. They must take offerings to the gods and take part in community rituals. Not doing so is a falta or a failing that could lead to illness or death. Hence, by linking the well-being with cohesive community activities, Wiraritari are caring for the social in a more than human way. But they also use modern healthcare. Their health system is syncretic. So the underlying premise of my argument is that by understanding a community's medical system and body ontology, like the Wiraritari, we can see and understand how they live in the world and how they relate to the non-human world and their place in the world, where they view themselves. And so the Wiraritari view themselves as part of a cosmic community, and this is how they live in the world. And this polytheistic sociality in the medical system treat the spiritual origins of illness, attending to social cohesion in a society of humans, the supernatural flora and fauna. So this is just an example from my own, actually my doctoral fieldwork, so nearly 15 years ago, more than a decade ago, of where I learned to appreciate this relationship that they share with this more than human community. So in January 2011, I was actually it was actually this fiesta, this ceremony was happening at the time, and I'd been invited to a large family fiesta in the valley community of Taimarita, where I did much of my early field work, so large that 6 bulls were sat in minimal shade tied to a tree waiting to be sacrificed. I was helping my host Tutu string up tostadas that we decorated with tiny wax figures so that these could be hung up at the altar. And she was explaining to me how the Cacau-Yariri gods like more natural colors. They like everything more natural. She said, when one of the tostadas slipped from a string and fell to the ground, I immediately bent to pick it up, and Tutu quickly intercepted. Leave it, she said. The gods won't like it after it's been on the floor. So this was really not a performance. Everything was done for the gods, and there was a really thick sense of this hanging in the air. Really felt like the Cacau-Yari were clearly everywhere. So medical syncretism, how does this come in? So the Wiraritari actually live on the march of the Durango scorpion, which is this scorpion. And until about the 1990s, the scorpion bite was one of the most common causes of child mortality. But it also makes an excellent example of medical syncretism. So we already know that if a child is bitten by a scorpion, they might die if they don't get an antidote. So they go immediately to the health centre to get their antidote, and the child may have to have 2 or 3 injections of it in order to be stabilised. But they also know that while the medicine can treat the symptom, it won't treat the cause. So why did that scorpion bite? And the cause is always in the spiritual realm. It's always social and spiritual. So in the paper, I focus more, I use maternal health as an example. So a lot of my research has been about maternal health. So a lot of my ethnographic data is about maternal health. And there's a very syncretic approach to pregnancy and childbirth. So while young women will attend the clinic for prenatal care or deliver in the clinic, they also care for the spiritual and social. So here, Enrique is making a God's eye for his wife who is pregnant, and he'll take it to a sacred site as an offering to the gods. So this is a community act. It's a spiritual act. It's an act of unity between husband and wife, whose unity is itself sacred. And it's an act of unity with gods and with the sacred site, which is going to be a river, a waterfall, a collection of rocks, some naturally occurring phenomena. I was going to put a little video on, but I think in interests of time, I won't. But I can share the link later. So this is actually from a video, which is an animated film about my research on the coloniality of gender, which ends up with a scene which is describing precisely this syncretic approach between where you have the coming together of the maracate or the shaman and the doctor in the health center. So my paper proposes a question. By centering Indigenous worldviews and forms of social organisation that are more than human, can we re-envisage how we address health challenges that characterise this epoch? Can we envisage a syncretic medical model that treats the physical body and at the same time the society and the environment on which it depends? And can this reconceptualisation unsettle capitalist modernity? So to center the human is to decenter the human, is to reconceptualize human's place in the world and who we share our society with. At an ontological level, this asks us to decolonize the notion of human being and to recognize the vitality of other life forms to our existence. At a conceptual level, we need to think how we name and therefore how we relate to nature, to reconceive of our more than human consortia as essential to our well-being and survival. And we may want to begin with the most obvious, challenging our relationship with the animals that humans consume, the patterns of production that form a chain of environmental, ecological, viral, social, and human harm. And so this is a proposal for open dialogue, or to open dialogues discussion about with and about our day-to-day more than human interactions.
Thank you, Jenny. So now I think we can open to the debate.
Okay, thank you. Ceres, did you want to say any concluding points before we hand over to the discussion?
Yeah, I think that well, first of all, I'm Ceres Victora from the Federal University of Rio Grande do Sul, and I'm also part of this project. And just start saying thank you to all of your insightful and exciting papers and presentations. As a moderator of the discussion, my role is mainly to help out, take your questions. So please raise your hands, and I'll just raise your hands or write down your questions either in Portuguese or English or Spanish. I think you have pointed out contradictions, identified factors, and described dynamics where the Anthropocene is visible. But I wondered if you could say something also about how the debate surrounding the Anthropocene sparks changes in medical anthropology, because somehow I think there is the lack of this point, not lack, but I mean, this is not something that has exactly been tackled in most of the papers. So it's perhaps a provocative question, but I just wanted to leave it in the air, not necessarily to be answered right now. So I'll be taking your questions, and if anyone care to answer start answering this first one, please feel free. Perhaps I can call out your names.
I can speak, Ceres. I just want to first of all thank you for that question, because it's actually a really, really, really relevant question to our project. And I don't know that I've got an answer, but I think a lot of the provocations, I think a lot of examples have been in the presentations today. So I think certainly there's been a lot of discussion about, both in the two papers at the beginning about COVID, in my own paper, about communicating with the more than human, and how medical anthropology needs to be embracing the more than human sociality. So, and I think in other work, we can see how engagement that we're learning, we're showing, medical anthropologists are showing that we are beginning to learn how to communicate with animals, with plants, with forests. So I think as a starting point, that would be my sort of first proposal to, as in how is medical anthropology sort of adapting to what the Anthropocene brings. Over to someone else.
Yeah. Just adding up on my one question. I think that the field of medical anthropology, or as we call it in Brazil, anthropology of the body and health, is sometimes a bit resistant to include, I mean, to really face the debate about the Anthropocene, because, you know, it's some people do not really, I mean, tend to, well, there are different views in medical anthropology. It's not a united field. So I was wondering if perhaps, speaking from Brazil, perhaps in other places, this has been more, it's been an easier debate than it's here. So I was just wondering if someone has an idea or other question, it's okay.
Ceres, I just wanted to say that perhaps even this debate on staying with the trouble is something that perhaps is making even more difficult to conceptualize where health and disease start and end. And I think this is something that we are challenged constantly, the fact that somehow we know that the alteration of the planet is so profound that, of course, is not reversible. And so this also has to do with these health disease processes. We wanted to address that in our paper through the concept of Anthropocene health, for example. So we just invite people to read the paper, of course, not to give all the answers. But I think it's a way in which the debate surrounding the Anthropocene is spurring changes in medical anthropology and the way we trace boundaries between health and disease states.
May I add something?
Yes.
I think one thing that comes to mind as well, is maybe what Laura says, is this the question of embodied, as well, like where does the body end, or so that was the other thing that's been coming to me in terms of I guess when talking about embodied inequalities, I'm tending to, in my own mind, locate the embodiment and a human body, and then somehow the Anthropocene being the environment, and this was not something that we built on in our work, but in the works, I think your work, Jenny, it made me think about how would a narration the Anthropocene from a place where we're not using the Earth as a planet, but as another entity, as a deity or something else, no? And I was quite excited by your work. It's just yes. So I think like what you're saying, Larry, around the boundaries, and there's something around the body, and I guess maybe this also in medical anthropology, there is a kind of engagement with the microbiome and stuff like that. So that feels kind of also pertinent in terms of the more than human, and maybe troubling the notion of the body in a sense as well, no? and its boundaries.
Just for me, just taking the calls mentioned to the microbiome, but not directly related to that, it also came to mind with that question, other modalities of knowing in academia, for instance, that it could be like how we combine medical anthropology or other methods of science and technology studies. It could be multimodal methods of researching embodied inequalities in this case. So for me, it's also, or for us, I think, for Cole and I think it's also a question of which methods and how we relate ourselves as well to the research, to our own research processes. So, yeah.
Thank you, Andrea. Sarah?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Is it my turn?
No, it's okay. Go, Sarah. And then
sorry.
go afterwards.
Okay, sorry about that. I didn't see.
No, it's okay.
No, it's just a quick comment. I think it's a really important question, and I mean, your points, Jane, that you raised about decentering human, I thought were really, really interesting, and kind of made me think again about the questions that we pose in our paper about this balance between social justice and social difference and those challenges. But my comment just briefly now is to think about, picking up on Andrew's point as well, the multidisciplinary approaches. I think it's kind of interesting to be attentive as a medical anthropologist where new conceptual frames might arise. So like the idea of planetary health, which is being taken up in contexts such as the WHO and the Lancet. And I think, One Health has been another area. So I think, there are critical engagements with that, but maybe we also need to think of collaborative engagement with these new framings as medical anthropologists that we can, kind of intervene on and help shape as well.
I was also going to say that in general, medical anthropology, at least the critical medical anthropology in Latin America, has been always very, very attentive to breaking down dichotomies in between, using frameworks such as the political economy of health, the political ecology of health, etc., etc. And but I think that now we are facing a change of paradigm because of the huge, I guess, the huge problems and challenges that we're facing in global health and in planetary, in the planetary crisis that we are living today. So I guess we need to. We've always broken down categories or Cartesian dichotomies like nature and culture and body and mind and biology and culture again, or society. But now we need to, and I guess we are turning to multi-species ethnography and new ontologies, indigenous ontologies, or what some of the contributors to this issue called the indigenous cosmographies against the colonial cosmographies, or other conceptual terms that we're using nowadays to try to explain what's going on. So I think we are breaking down barriers, and we're breaking down also disciplinary barriers to be able to look at all these issues, which are very, very important, very challenging. And I think one of the major challenges we actually face is not to fall into a type of dark anthropology, because I guess we know that the future is grim, and but we need to be able not to fall into despair. And I think that's not something that we only face in medical anthropology. We also face it in other disciplines, and we also face it in our work when we are engaged into it, in between, you know, academic work and activist type of work. I guess, to me, that's one of the major challenges that we're facing nowadays as socially engaged and politically engaged medical anthropologists. It's a very hard moment of life, and it's a very hard moment of planetary life, and it's a very hard moment of, you know, human life and non-human life in the planet.
I was just going to add that I think there is some medical anthropological approaches, and people writing on the Anthropocene have something in common, which is this focus on, which I think I found important for my article, and looking at emotion in relation to toxicity and environmental conflict, is the kind of real merging of the immaterial and the material, and really bringing that to the forefront of understanding how people actually experience, for example, toxicity. So yeah, I mean, I think they're really suited when you look at them together.
Victoria?
Yes, hi. I just wanted to add two comments. In the first hand, I think that the Anthropocene concept is a concept that continues to open up the conversation, and that impulse medical anthropology to dialogue with other sub-areas and other disciplines. Sorry, I'm with my little daughter here. And that's important because it enables, despite of the criticisms of this concept, it's a concept that open up the conversation with another areas. And I think that that's important in order not to become a little ghetto of people that are only interested in biomedical health issues. That sometimes is how we are seen from the outside. And being able to open up the conversation about health and environment, health and collective health and you know, agronomy, microbiology, chemistry, and other key areas in the topics that we have discussed. And the other issue that I wanted to highlight is that we still have our specificity in methodological approach on this social health. I think that medical anthropology, despite the different formations, areas, and so on, we have like a way of addressing this kind of phenomena. We have a way of looking, we have a way of considering how health and disease and illness is experienced in everyday life. And that I think that that's a precious thing that we should continue to, I don't know if defend is the word, but to develop, to share, to deepen our methodological approach, because I think that we have a differential view to bring to this global conversation. And I think that this MAD special issue is a great example of how these different health processes can be seen from this perspective, and the kind of input that we can bring up to the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Do you have any other question? Is there anything that the presenters would like to add before we wrap up the seminar? Well, unfortunately, you know, our time is up, so I'll just pass the ask
Maybe
Paola.
Sarah,
Yeah,
just
please.
oh,
Paola.
Paula. Okay.
Okay. Just before we end our session today, I would like to remind all of you, if you're interested in joining, we will be having the next session of our seminar series in November. We don't have a set date, yes, but it's going to be like mid-November. And the person who will be speaking is Professor Stefano Varese. He's an emeritus at UC Davis. And Stefano will be talking on the Pueblos Amazónico Ashaninka and Kikwaruna, reconstitution of their sacred territories between Ecuador, Peru, and Brazil, beyond the state boundaries, and the defense of all the entities of the selva. So we're going to continue looking at indigenous ontologies or in cosmographies, as Jean Landon and Scalpel were saying in their paper. So let's hope you can join us, and we will let you know the date as soon as we have it. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Paola. Jenny, would you like to?
Only to say thank you so much to everybody who's come and participated, and to thank you those of you who've come and listened. And this recording should be available on our website, which is at the moment hosted by UCL. The Embodied Inequalities of the Anthropocene web pages, if you want to go over anything or see any of the presentations again. But please go out and go and read all the papers, and do get in touch with us if you want to continue a discussion, or in maybe another way you would like to participate in the project we have. And I think, Celis, your question is absolutely the question we have to have in the next conference panel or discussion, because it's a brilliant question to think about, and I think as a group it's really good for us to think about it as well. Thank you, everybody. That's all from me. Okay,
thanks all.
Okay, thanks everybody, and goodbye.
Bye-bye. Jenny, I'm just checking. I'm going to press end here, then I think that ends the session. Is that right?
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just checking that.
That's why you're hanging on. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know whether the recording is, but anyway, great. It was a great session, really wonderful, and really, really good. So we'll catch up afterwards.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Bye. Bye.